Illustrator Layers. So the Layers panel in Illustrator is located at the bottom of my panel dock. If you are not able to locate it, go under Window and check the Layers. That will bring up your Layers panel. So the Layers panel is very similar if you have worked in Photoshop, but yet it still is a little bit different. So it's a nice place to organize our work. We're able to have our objects or group of objects on separate layers and be able to independently manipulate them or modify them. And the other advantage of layers is the ability or possibility to store multiple versions of our work in one file. So let's examine layers a little bit in more detail. So when I say layers, you should think organization, managing a complex illustration, and really make it work to your advantage. So I'm going to draw a couple of objects here, and you watch what happens on layers as I do that. Now, one of the things that as layers, we are limited really only by the computer's memory. So as far as how many layers can I have, really there's no limit. And the layers in Illustrator are not as intensive as they would be in Photoshop. So I'm going to go now with my elliptical, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key to drag from the center, hold down my Shift key to make sure that it's a perfect circle, and we'll put a different color in there. And now one more time I'm going to click and drag with my rectangular tool, this time making it more a linear shape, and again choose a different color here. So all of these right now are just simple fills with strokes. Now when you look at what happened in layers, you may be wondered, well, I only have one layer, although I have three objects, but yet only one layer. So Illustrator works a little bit differently in that Illustrator does not or never automatically creates a layer or copies a layer or deletes a layer, regardless of whatever you do in the artwork. So it will place, if I don't do anything differently, it will place all of my objects on just one layer. I'll just have layer 1 and that is it. But inside of layer 1, I have what we call sublayers. Each sublayer then is created as I create new objects. So every new object that I create or that I place in Illustrator will be on its own sublayer. Okay, so this is where I can choose to name it as well. I get a little thumbnail, a little miniature picture of what is on that specific sublayer. And you can see I kind of get a little composite view up on my layer thumbnail. So I'm able to see the stacking order of my objects, which is kind of the hierarchy. So we always know that the top object here, which in this case is this rectangle sublayer, is at the top of my stack. It's in the front, if you want to think of it that way. Whereas my pink rectangle is at the bottom of my stacking order, or it's in the back at the bottom. So I'm able to do some options here with my layers, and what we need to do is get to our layer dialog box. Now this drop down menu allows me to see some options regarding my layers. For instance, I do have options for rectangle. It happens to be referencing the current active layer. Okay, at the very bottom here you see panel options, and I just want to show you the panel options don't give me options for each specific sub layer or layer. Instead, it's just the overview of how things are looking in my layers panel. So if I wanted to increase my size of my rows here, I could, and I can actually in Illustrator customize how many pixels. So if your eyes aren't so good, you can kind of make it be a little bit easier for you to see. I'm going to click OK. Do you see how that enlarged my thumbnail so it is a little bit easier to see? So that's the panel options. What I want are the options for the specific layer or sublayer. So you can use the panel menu like I just showed you, or you can just double click on the layer. Now be careful where you're double clicking, If I double click on top of the name, I'm able to rename it, which I should name these descriptively, always do that. But if I double click on the options here, then I can choose a few show or lock. Let's double click now on the layer. So I want to do that one more time. I double click on the sub layer, I get a chance to rename it and either show or lock. Okay. When I double click on the layer, I get more layer options. So you can see the difference there. So it's very important where you double click. So let's go through each one of these items. So I can choose to name this at this point, and again, you want to be descriptive with your names. This is my layer, which all of my sub layers are part of. The color here gives me an option for setting a selection color for my layer. So when I choose here, and it will by default just go right on down this list. So my layer 2 will have light red as its highlight color. My layer 3 will have green, and so on down the list. What I can do is change that. So if I have objects that are a little bit hard to read because they're the same color, I can't see my anchor points, I can't see those bounding box, I would then need to go change my selection color. It has nothing to do with the color on that object. I then have some other options here. Template, if I check template, some of these other things will gray out, and template is basically an option if you're going to trace artwork. So if I'm bringing artwork in, I might want to make this be a template layer, which will then, it will be locked. As you can see, I will not be able to print it, or it will not be printed, cannot be printed, and it's just easier to trace. The show or hide, this option is exactly the same as me clicking the eyeball button over here, the indicates visibility icon. The preview, this toggles two different modes, and I'll show you this in a different method, but what this does is it toggles between a preview mode and an outline mode. And the outline mode does not show color fills. So if you're really intensely editing some linear components and you don't want to be distracted by the color, then you would go into an outline mode. And there's another way that we can do that as well. Lock, of course, this is just like the lock icon that I can click in my second column right next to my visibility indicator. Print, if I don't want this layer to print. Now don't get this one, don't let it catch you off guard, I guess, because sometimes you uncheck the print and you're going to go do a preview and you print your illustration and you wonder, why isn't this printing? I see it, it's visible, why is it not printing? Probably because you've turned off the print option. So when you do that, whatever is on that layer, the sub layers, they won't print. The last will be a dim images, and this is similar to the template. However, dim images still will allow me to print, and it allows me to dim it so that, again, it reduces the intensity, maybe making it easier to trace. Okay, I'll turn that off for now. So if I click OK right now, I'm see that my name change took place, and now I have those settings in place. So how do we create new layers then? I said you can never, Illustrator never automatically creates, copies, or deletes a layer. You have to do that. The user has to do that. When I created each one of these objects, I created sub-layers. I did not create a layer. So going to the new layer icon here in my layers panel, clicking that, I now have layer 2. And if you can see, I'm going to collapse my first layer. How this is blue, and right here this is red. That's the color visibility that we were looking at before. If I double click, here you go, it's light red. If I double click on this one, you see it's blue. So that just gives me the color indicators for selections, when I look at my anchor points, those types of things. The other method that I can do is actually go to my layer panel, and in the menu here, my layer panel menu, I can click to create a new layer here as well. Okay, so probably the faster way is going to be using this little icon. So those are two methods that you can create a new layer. Now, duplicating layers, if I wanted to duplicate this layer, I can click again an option over here, duplicate, or I can drag this layer right over top of my new layer icon, let up, and I've made a duplication. So now if I turn this off, let's do a click and drag to select everything that's here, move it down to the bottom corner. Now turn this on, you can see I do have two of them. Okay, so that's a duplication, and that is pretty standard in all Adobe products. Clicking a layer or sublayer and dragging it over the new layer icon will create a duplicate. How about selecting items? So I'm going to, again, trash. Let's throw this away. Yes. We have some other icons here, things that we will discuss later on, like clipping masks and locating objects. But let's open up this layer. My layer is called Example. I have 3 sublayers, 3 items in here. Now to select artwork, we can click the layer name here. But you notice that I have this layer being active, but nothing is selected at the moment. I have to click or target what's on that layer. So I'm going to click this little indicates icon. It's a box that's on the edge on the far right. And it's going to be in the color that your selected art, what we defined up in my layer options. So that I now can see that my pink square is selected. Now if I select something from the art board right here, you can see that I again see that box. Notice that I also see it in my layer because this is part of the layer. This is a component of that layer. And if I click the green, you can see how that changes. Okay, so that little box, that little square there is called my indicates selected art icon. Now I don't have to just use that. I can also use my target, my layer target. So the layer target allows me to again select objects, and in this case I can do more of a select all command where I select my target and I get kind of this 2 double circle thing looking like a target, and there I can see all of my components. So that's kind of like a select all for a layer. All right. If I do an alt click, you see how I'm going to deselect here. If I click on a layer, you know, it doesn't select it. If I double click on it, it brings over my options. But if I alt or option click on it, it also will do a select all. So that's kind of a fast way that might be something beneficial for you in the future. Just to review again, to show and hide things, I can show and hide individual layers by turning the eyeball on. And again, I can lock layers by clicking the lock icon here. So those are a fast way to make things safe, so to speak, with the lock or show and hide. Now rearranging the stacking order, clicking and dragging allows me to rearrange things. And so now my blue linear rectangle is at the bottom of the stack and my green circle is at the top. So if I drag this behind, it's, you know, the stacking order is such that my pink square is at the top. I can't see my green, so that's something to be aware of, and it's always a good idea to watch that layers panel and see what's happening there. So that's a little bit about the layers panel. Good idea to have this one open all the time when you're working in Illustrator.